Hello everyone, and welcome back to PQV Story. This is the place where we explore those unforgettable stories about the human spirit, stories of quiet strength, unexpected courage, and the powerful moments when the underdog finally gets there. If you believe in the power of stories like these, and if you're new here, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It truly helps our community grow and ensures you won't miss a single story. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. We love hearing from you. Today, we have a story that asks a powerful question. What happens when the most overlooked person in a room is also the most brilliant? Let's dive into the incredible story of the quill. You know, there's a certain kind of quiet in a place like that after everyone's gone home for the night. The kind of quiet that feels heavy, expensive. Sterling & Sons Publishing wasn't just an office. It was a cathedral built to worship words and, well, the men who published them. The walls were dark mahogany, lined with portraits of 4 generations of Sterling men, all looking down with the same stern, confident gaze. I always felt like they were watching me, making sure I didn't scuff the marble floors. At 11 p.m., the only sound was the soft, rhythmic hum of my floor polisher. My name is Clara May Thompson, and for the last 2 years, my job was to make this temple to old money spotless. I was 24, and I'd perfected the art of being invisible. My gray uniform, my quiet movements, it was a skill. A survival skill, really, in a place so far removed from the West Virginia hollers I grew up in. But while I was invisible, I wasn't blind. My eyes saw everything: the book titles on the shelves, the worried looks on the junior editors' faces, the half-eaten salads in the trash that probably cost more than my lunch. Tonight, the air was thick with anxiety, and it all seemed to radiate from the office of Mr. Alistair Finch. He was the 4th and current king in this castle, a man who wore tailored suits that, heck, his shoes probably cost more than my monthly rent. His door was slightly ajar, and I could see him staring at his computer screen, his handsome face tight with frustration. The source of his misery was spread all over his desk: copies of The Quill, a once famous literary magazine that was now the company's biggest failure. It was his father's passion project, his legacy, and it was dying. "It's the voice," I heard him mutter to himself, his voice a low growl. "We've lost the damn voice." I finished the lobby and started down the hall, the wheels of my cart making a soft squeaking sound, the only sound that announced my existence. As I reached his office to empty the trash, he suddenly slammed a thick manuscript down on his desk. The thud made me jump. $100,000 for an MFA from Yale. "And they write like accountants," he seethed. He let out a long, tired sigh, rubbed his temples, and finally stood up. He walked right past me, his gaze passing through me as if I were a ghost, a piece of the furniture. Not a flicker of acknowledgement. I guess to him I'd gotten used to it. Being unseen was part of the job description. I slipped into his office to empty his bin. The manuscript was still on his desk, its title page reading, "Echoes in the Dust." On top, a note from Beatrice Vance, his lead editor and a woman who wore her ambition like expensive perfume, was clipped. "Alistair, a bit raw, but it has potential. The ending needs a complete rework." Too sentimental, I couldn't help it. I glanced at the first page. I'd seen the author's file earlier when it came through the mailroom. He was from a forgotten town in rural Ohio. I knew these stories. I knew this kind of dust. My dad. He was a coal miner. He used to say that reading was the only way to see the sun when you were a mile underground. He'd taught me that honesty in a story was everything. Something inside me just snapped, not in a loud way, but in a quiet, determined way. It was a risk, a stupid one that could get me fired in a heartbeat. But that story deserved better. I pulled a small yellow sticky note from my cart, my pen hovering over it for a second. My heart was pounding, but my hand was steady. I wrote, "The ending isn't sentimental, it's honest. You're trying to make a story about dirt feel clean. The power isn't in changing the ending. It's in the silence after the last word. Hold on the final image for 3 more sentences. Let the dust settle. That's the voice." My hands were shaking a little as I peeled the note off and stuck it on the back of the very last page, where it wouldn't be seen right away. A hidden thought, a secret. I finished my work, emptied the last of the trash, and clocked out, disappearing back into the cold Boston night. I left behind nothing but polished floors and a whisper of an idea, a little yellow note that I had no idea was about to start a war. Let me tell you, the next morning, walking into that building felt different. I had this buzzing feeling under my skin, a mix of sheer terror and a strange, quiet thrill. I kept my head down, focusing on the scuff marks on the floor, trying to look like I belonged to the shadows. I fully expected to be called into an office and fired on the spot, but nothing happened. The morning passed in a blur of cleaning solvents and the low hum of corporate life. Meanwhile, up on the top floor, Alistair Finch was holding my little yellow note. I found this out later, of course, but I can picture it perfectly. Him, sitting in that leather chair that probably cost as much as a car, his brow furrowed. He read it once, then twice. Let the dust settle. I imagine he walked through that story's ending in his mind, feeling the weight of those extra sentences I suggested. He must have felt something, because the first thing he did was stride into Beatrice Vance's office, all thunder and purpose. "Beatrice, did you leave this note on the manuscript?" he asked, his voice sharp. From what I know of Beatrice, she would have taken the note with her perfectly manicured fingers, her expression shifting from curiosity to a faint, almost imperceptible sneer. It was the look she gave anything that wasn't her own idea. "No," she would have said, her voice smooth as silk. "That's not my handwriting." Perhaps one of the junior editors is trying to be bold. He knew it wasn't them. I think deep down, he knew none of his Ivy League hires had that kind of gut instinct. He spent the day asking around, trying to be casual about it, but the question was always there. Who wrote the note? When no one came forward, he eventually let it go, figuring it was a fluke. A one-off moment of inspiration from some timid soul in the office who was too scared to claim it. He thought that would be the end of it. He was wrong. A week later, I was cleaning the conference room after a marketing meeting. They'd left the presentation boards up. The proposal for the next cover of the quill was a sterile abstract graphic of lines and dots. It felt cold, lifeless. It looked like something you'd see in a bank lobby. I remember thinking, this magazine is supposed to be about the human condition, about life and struggle and love. Why are you so afraid to show a human face? That night, another yellow note found its way onto Alistair's desk, tucked inside the cover proposal. This one said, "This cover says nothing. People connect with faces, not formulas. Find a photograph of an old woman from the Rust Belt, someone who looks like she's lived a life. Show the lines on her face. That's your cover. That's your story." That second note changed everything. It wasn't a fluke anymore. It was a pattern. The next day, Alistair stormed into the design department, threw the abstract art on the table, and using my words, demanded something with a human face. The office started buzzing. People began talking about a ghost editor, a phantom critic who was leaving these sharp, insightful notes all over the place. Beatrice, of course, hated it. "It's obviously just some intern trying to get noticed," she'd say loudly in the break room, making sure everyone heard her. "It's unprofessional," but I could tell she was rattled. This ghost was challenging her, and worse, Alistair was listening. I couldn't stop myself. It was like watching someone try to fix a beautiful, intricate clock with a hammer. I had too. Intervene. I saw a marketing plan that was all about targeting the same old wealthy suburbs, the same high-end bookstores. I left a note on it that night. Your most powerful new writers aren't reading in Greenwich, Connecticut. They're in community college libraries in Detroit and Fresno. They're finding stories online. Why aren't you trying to find them where they are? By then, Alistair was obsessed. This ghost wasn't just a literary critic. They were a strategist. They had a vision. He started leaving out documents, almost like bait, hoping for another note. The mystery was driving him crazy, but it was also the first time in years he'd felt a spark of excitement for the magazine. The ghost was challenging every stale, elitist assumption his company was built on. And me? I was just the cleaner, pushing my cart down the silent, empty hallways at midnight, feeling more powerful and more terrified than I had ever felt in my life. I knew it was only a matter of time before the ghost was caught. Things started to get really tense after that. The quill was 3 weeks from its print deadline, and the whole top floor felt like a pressure cooker. The lead story, a piece they'd paid a fortune for from some big-shot author, was to put it mildly a dud. It was technically perfect, but it had no soul. I could feel Alistair Finch's frustration radiating through the entire building. He was getting desperate. He wasn't just curious about his ghost anymore. I think he felt like he needed the ghost, and that's when he decided to stop waiting and start hunting. That night, he set a trap. I didn't know it at the time, of course. All I saw was a new manuscript sitting squarely in the middle of his otherwise pristine desk. It was positioned so perfectly, it was almost like a display in a museum. A single note was clipped to the top in his sharp, decisive handwriting. Addressed to Beatrice. Final thoughts on this by morning. Is it salvageable? It was the perfect bait. A challenge. I found out later he wasn't even at home. He was hidden. Away in the security office down the hall, a place I didn't even know existed, watching the live black and white feed from the tiny camera in his office. He was watching and waiting. Hours passed. The building emptied out, floor by floor. The bright office lights were replaced by the dim glow of the emergency fixtures. Then, at exactly 11:15 p.m., the camera feed would have shown the door to his office swinging open. My cleaning cart rolled into view first, its one wobbly wheel making that same old squeak. Then me. I watched him on the tape later during the fallout. You could see him lean forward in his chair. He watched me empty his trash, wipe down his desk, polish the glass on his picture frames. Standard stuff. Then, I stopped. My eyes fell on the manuscript. It felt like a magnet pulling at a piece of metal in my soul. I stood there for a good minute, completely still. In my head I was screaming at myself, "Don't do it, Clara. Just walk away." But I couldn't. I slowly reached out, my fingers trembling just a little, and picked it up. I started to read. He told me afterward that he sat there, transfixed, as I read for nearly 30 minutes. He watched the flicker of concentration in my eyes, the way I'd bite my lip when a sentence didn't ring true. The story was about a fisherman in Maine. It was beautifully written, but it was a lie. This man doesn't sound like he's ever held a fishing net, I remember thinking. His hands are described like a poet's. I finished it, put it down, and hesitated. I looked toward the door, then back at the desk. I was about to walk away, I swear I was. But then I thought of my dad, coming home from the mine, his hands raw and black with coal dust, and the honest, simple way he would tell a story. This author, for all his fancy words, didn't have a shred of that truth. I couldn't let it go. I reached for the small notepad in my pocket, tore out a page, and started to write. I pointed out how the fisherman's hands were described with the softness of a writer's, how his dialogue sounded like it came from a philosophy textbook, not the deck of a boat. I offered a different path, a way to make it real. I tucked my note inside the second chapter, placed the manuscript neatly back in the center of the desk, and turned to continue my work, my heart pounding out a guilty rhythm. And that's when the world tilted on its axis. The door flew open. I hadn't even heard him coming. Alistair Finch stood there, his face pale, his eyes wide with a look I couldn't decipher. It was a storm of shock, anger, and something else. Something that looked like the ground had just crumbled beneath his feet. My spray bottle slipped from my hand and clattered onto the floor. He didn't say a word. He just strode past me to the desk, snatched up the manuscript, and pulled out my handwritten note. He stared at it, then at me. The silence was thick, suffocating. All the air had been sucked out of the room. "You?" he finally breathed, his voice a disbelieving whisper. As if on cue. The universe decided to make a bad situation 1,000 times. Worse, Beatrice Vance appeared in the doorway, holding a leather briefcase. "Alistair, I forgot my files for the... What's going on here?" Her eyes, sharp and calculating, darted from Alistair's thunderous expression to me, frozen by my cart. She saw the manuscript, the note in Alistair's hand. Her gaze then fell to my gray uniform, and a slow, cruel smirk spread across her face. "Oh, you have..." Beatrice's laugh felt like it was physically bouncing off the walls of that silent, expensive office. For a second, everything just froze. Me, standing there in my gray uniform, feeling my cheeks burn with shame. Beatrice with that triumphant, venomous smirk on her face. And Alistair, looking like his whole world had just been turned upside down and shaken out. Then he moved. He didn't yell, but his voice was like ice. "Beatrice, that's enough. Go home." She looked like she wanted to argue, to savor her victory a little longer, but something in his eyes made her stop. She gave me one last withering look and walked out, the click of her heels on the marble floor sounding like tiny, sharp little gunshots. When she was gone, he turned to me. The shock on his face had been replaced by a cold, unreadable mask. "Get back to your work," he snapped, his voice harsh. He didn't want to deal with me. He couldn't even look at me. He just pointed toward the door. I grabbed my cart, my hands shaking so badly I could barely steer it straight, and I fled. I didn't even finish my shift. I just clocked out and ran, feeling the weight of their eyes on my back the entire way home. I spent that night staring at the ceiling of my tiny apartment, convinced my life as I knew it was over. I figured the next morning I'd get a call from HR telling me not to bother coming in. But the call never came. What I didn't know was that Alistair Finch didn't go home either. He spent the entire night in that office, alone. He told me about it much later. He said he just sat there in the dark, with all my little yellow notes spread out on his massive mahogany desk like a game of solitaire. The note about the fisherman, the one about the Rust Belt woman on the cover, the one about the marketing plan. Each one, a quiet, brilliant argument against everything he thought he knew about talent. He said he kept thinking about his father. His father, the man who built this company from nothing, used to say, "Alistair, an Ivy League degree teaches you how to polish a story. It doesn't teach you how to find one with a heartbeat. For that, you need instinct." And as he looked at my notes, all he could see was instinct. Raw, undeniable, and coming from the one person in the building he had been trained his entire life to ignore. His pride was at war with his desperation. His company was failing. His father's legacy was turning to dust. And the only person who seemed to know how to save it was the girl who cleaned his toilets. The next day, I got the summons. A crisp email from his assistant. "Mr. Finch requests your presence in his office at 10 a.m. That's it. No explanation. I figured this was it, the firing squad. I took off my uniform and put on the only nice dress I owned, a simple blue one I'd bought from a thrift store. I thought, if I'm going to be executed, at least I won't be wearing gray. I walked into his office, my heart pounding a hole in my chest. He was standing by the window, looking out over the city. He didn't turn around for a full minute. When he did, his face was tired, but the anger from the night before was gone. "I'm sorry, sir," I started, my voice barely a whisper. "I know I crossed a line. I'll pack my things." He held up a hand, silencing me. "Where did you learn to do this?" he asked, gesturing to the notes on his desk. "I read," I said honestly. "My dad. He worked in the mines back in West Virginia. He used to save every penny for books." "Did you go to college?" "2 years. State school," I said, feeling that old pang of shame. "Then my mom got sick. I had to come home." He nodded slowly, processing it. He wasn't looking at me like I was the cleaner anymore. He was looking at me like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve. He was a businessman, and right now, he was a businessman whose company was sinking. He was about to make a Hail Mary pass. "I'm going to make you a proposition," he said, his voice flat, all business. "It's absurd, and it stays between us. As far as the staff is concerned, you are a temporary consultant I've hired on a freelance basis." He leaned forward, his eyes boring into mine. "You have one issue, the next one. You will have final say on the manuscripts we choose, the cover art, the layout. You will work with me directly." I just stared at him, unable to form words. "This is the wager," he continued, his tone leaving no room for argument. "If the issue succeeds, if sales increase by 20% and the reviews are positive, I will give you a full-time salaried editorial position. If it fails, you will be terminated immediately, and you will sign a non-disclosure agreement stating none of this ever happened. You will disappear." It was a cruel, impossible offer. A cliff with no safety net. He was setting me up to be the scapegoat if things went wrong. But it was also the only door that had ever, in my entire life, opened for me. My first day as a consultant felt like a joke, and I was the punchline. Alistair, sticking to his side of the wager, had given me an office. Well, office is a generous word. It was a converted supply closet on the far side of the floor, windowless, and still smelling faintly of toner fluid and disinfectant. He gave me a laptop, a security badge, and a vague introduction to the editorial team that went something like, "This is Clara Thompson. She'll be consulting with us on the next issue, bringing a fresh perspective." He said it with all the enthusiasm of a man announcing a root canal. The team, led by Beatrice, took their cues from him. If Alistair was treating me like a dirty little secret, they would treat me like an infection. Beatrice was the master of this Cold War. In the first morning meeting, she looked at me with a smile that never reached her eyes and said, her voice dripping with that false, high society sweetness, "So Clara, your last name is Thompson. Any relation to the Connecticut Thompsons?" It wasn't a question. It was a test, a way of immediately establishing that I wasn't one of them. "No, ma'am," I said, my voice coming out a little too quiet. "My Thompsons are from Boone County, West Virginia." "How quaint," she replied, and a few of the junior editors let out little snickers. That was just the beginning. The hostility was relentless, but it was the kind you find in corporate America, death by 1,000 paper cuts. I'd be conveniently left off important email chains. If I tried to speak in a meeting, someone would start talking right over me as if I hadn't made a sound. They whispered just loud enough for me to hear as I walked past, making fun of the faint Appalachian lilt in my voice that I tried so hard to smooth out. And their biggest weapon was the work itself. They buried me in the slush pile. If you don't know, the slush pile is exactly what it sounds like. It's a mountain of unsolicited manuscripts sent in by aspiring writers without an agent. In a place like Sterling and Sons, it was the literary graveyard. The place where stories without the right connections or the fancy MFA degree went to die. Unread. They gave me stacks of them, hundreds of them, with a fake smile saying, "We'd love your fresh perspective on these." What they were really saying was, "Here, choke on this." Fail. So that's what I did. I sat in that windowless closet for 16, sometimes 18 hours a day. I lived on vending machine coffee and stale pretzels. I'd sometimes fall asleep for an hour or two on the tiny, uncomfortable couch in the break room. I read until my eyes burned, and you know what? I didn't mind. Every condescending smirk from Beatrice, every whispered joke, it all just felt like another gallon of fuel in my engine. They thought the slush pile was a punishment. To me, it was home. It was where the real voices were, the ones that hadn't been polished into boring perfection by some fancy workshop. I was digging for gold in a mountain of trash. And then, one night, around 3 a.m., I found it. The manuscript was titled Coal Dust and Constellations. It was written on cheap, thin paper, the ink slightly smeared in places. The author's name was Sam Hemlock, with a return address from a town in Kentucky I'd never heard of. There was no agent, no cover letter listing his prestigious awards. Just a story. It was raw, brutal, and so breathtakingly beautiful, it made the hair on my arms stand up. It was about a former factory worker watching his town die, trying to explain the stars to his young daughter. It was a story I knew in my bones. The next morning, I walked into the editorial meeting, my hands shaking slightly, and I placed the manuscript on the center of that long, polished table. "This," I said, my voice clear and steady for the first time in weeks, "is our lead story." Beatrice picked it up with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. She read the author's name and address and let out a little sigh of theatrical disbelief. "From the slush pile? By a nobody? Clara, this is the quill. Our readers expect you know, that little glimmer of hope I felt. It actually started to grow into something real. After Alistair read Sam Hemlock's manuscript, something shifted in him. He didn't say much, he wasn't the type, but his actions spoke volumes. He called me into his office to discuss the story, and he actually listened. He looked me in the eye when I spoke. He started forwarding me other manuscripts, with a simple clipped note attached. "Your thoughts?" For the first time I wasn't the ghost, the cleaner, or the consultant. I was just a voice he wanted to hear. And let me tell you, nothing in that building went unnoticed. Especially not by Beatrice Vance. The change was subtle, but in the Shark Tank of Sterling & Sons, it was a seismic event. The real turning point came one afternoon. Alistair's assistant came to my little closet office and said, "Mr. Finch has requested you join him for a working lunch in his office." He had ordered sandwiches from a real Boston deli downtown, not the fancy, overpriced caterer the company usually used. As I walked down the hall with him, carrying a pastrami on rye, I saw Beatrice standing in her doorway. The look on her face, it wasn't just anger. It was a cold, calculating fury. It was the look of a queen who just saw a peasant sit on her throne. In her world, I hadn't just been given a seat at the table. I had contaminated it. That, I believe, is when she decided that if she couldn't outshine me with talent, she would bury me with my past. She decided it was time to stop whispering and start building a weapon. She was smart, I'll give her that. She didn't just gossip. She went for the jugular. She hired a private investigator, framing it to accounting as a standard, confidential background check for a high-level consultant. It was a lie, of course. This wasn't a background check. It was an opposition research campaign. I can almost hear her on the phone with the investigator, her voice low and smooth as venom. "I want everything. Don't worry about what's sealed. I want to know where she comes from, who her people are, and every mistake she's ever made." A week later, a sleek, leather-bound dossier landed on her desk, and it was exactly the ammunition she was looking for. To a normal person, it would have just been a story of a working-class family struggling to get by. But to Beatrice, and to the world she lived in, it was a damning indictment. It was a portrait of someone who simply did not belong. The report had everything. It had my father's sealed juvenile record from when he was 18, a stupid bar fight that he'd regretted his entire life. But on paper, it just said, assault. It had the records of our family's near bankruptcy after the coal mines shut down, painting us as financially irresponsible failures. And then there was the crown jewel, the thing she knew would be the killing blow, my college transcript. It showed my 3.9 GPA. It showed I was on the dean's list every single semester. And it showed, in cold, bureaucratic letters, that I had withdrawn just one semester shy of graduating with honors in English literature, that the word on the transcript wasn't quit, it was withdrew, a neutral term. But Beatrice knew exactly how to frame it. She saw the perfect narrative. Clara May Thompson, the brilliant fraud. The unstable girl from a family of criminals and failures who couldn't even finish what she started. A quitter, she didn't move right away. She waited. She spent her days being perfectly, professionally pleasant to my face, all while holding the dossier that was designed to ruin me. She was sharpening her knife, planning the perfect moment to strike. She genuinely believed she was doing the right thing, that she was protecting the company, its legacy, from a cancer. From me, she saw herself as the gatekeeper of quality and standards. But what she was really guarding was a gate that kept people like me out. And as she prepared for her attack, she had no idea she wasn't just trying to get an employee fired. She was starting a war. The boardroom at Sterling & Sons was on the top floor. It felt less like a room and more like a glass box suspended in the sky, looking down on the rest of Boston. The table was a single intimidating slab of polished black granite that felt a mile long. I sat beside Alistair, wearing my one good thrift store dress, feeling like a sparrow that had accidentally flown into a cage full of eagles. The men and women of the executive committee, all older, all dressed in exquisitely tailored suits, looked at me with a polite, bored curiosity. I was a line item on their agenda, a risk Alistair was taking, and they weren't impressed. Alistair started the meeting, his voice confident as he laid out the new vision for the Quill, highlighting the raw, authentic power of Sam Hemlock's story. I could feel the skepticism in the room. It was a cold front moving in. It's a significant departure from our established brand. Alistair, one of the older men, Mr. Davenport said, peering over his glasses. Our readership is accustomed to a certain pedigree. That was the opening Beatrice had been waiting for. She stood up, her movements graceful and practiced. She had the perfect expression on her face, a mask of deep, professional concern mixed with a touch of regret. It was a performance, and she was the star. And that, Mr. Davenport, is precisely what worries me, she began, her voice smooth as honey. While I admire Alistair's commitment to innovation, I feel it is my solemn duty to bring a matter of due diligence to the committee's attention. She paused, letting the gravity of her words sink in. It concerns our new consultant, Ms. Thompson. Every single head at that table turned to me. The polite curiosity was gone, replaced by sharp, focused scrutiny. My heart, which had been hammering against my ribs, suddenly felt like it had stopped beating altogether. Beatrice placed a stack of sleek, black dossiers on the table. I took the liberty of running a full background check, she announced, sliding a copy in front of each board member. And frankly, the findings are deeply troubling. A tense silence fell over the room, broken only by the soft rustle of pages turning. I watched their faces as they read, their expressions hardening. They were reading the story of my life, twisted into a weapon. It seems Ms. Thompson comes from a rather unstable background, Beatrice continued, narrating the execution. Her father has a criminal record for assault. The family has a history of financial distress. And most concerningly, she paused for dramatic effect, she is not a college graduate. She is in fact a dropout. That word dropout hung in the air like a death sentence. In this room, for these people, it was the ultimate sin. It meant you were a quitter, a failure, someone who couldn't cut it. I could see the final judgment click into place in their eyes. I was no longer a consultant. I was just a fraud from the wrong side of the tracks. Alistair looked completely blindsided. "Beatrice, this is wildly inappropriate," he said, his voice low and tight. "Is it?" she shot back, her voice losing its sympathetic tone and gaining a sharp steel edge. "Or is it inappropriate to hand the reins of this company's most cherished legacy to an unqualified individual with a questionable past who lied by omission? We have a brand to protect. We have standards." She then turned her cold, triumphant gaze on me. "Ms. Thompson, would you care to explain to the board why you abandoned your education?" This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. The public execution. I felt a hot flush of shame, and for a split second, I wanted to disappear. I wanted to run out of that room and never look back. But then, I thought of my mother. I thought of her telling me, "Clara May, don't you ever let anyone make you feel small for the burdens you carry." I pushed my chair back and stood up slowly. My hands were trembling, but I clasped them behind my back. I looked at Beatrice, then around the table, meeting the gaze of each and every person in that room. "You're right, Miss Vance," I said. My voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. It carried across that silent room with perfect clarity. I am a college dropout. I let my admission settle. I saw Beatrice's lips curl into a faint, victorious smirk. "I had a 3.9 GPA, I continued. I was one semester away from graduating. With honors in English literature, I had a full scholarship. I dropped out because my mother was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. The doctors at the county hospital gave her 6 months to live." The smirk on Beatrice's face vanished. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. My father had just been laid off from the mine, and his black lung was getting worse. There was no money for a home care nurse. There was no insurance that would cover it. There was only me. So yes, I abandoned my education. I went home, and I worked a day shift at the diner and a night shift stocking shelves at the grocery store. To pay for her morphine, I spent my nights reading to her Jane Austen, Walt Whitman, just like my dad used to do for me. I held her hand, I changed her bed sheets, and I made sure she wasn't alone when she took her last breath. I took a shaky breath and looked directly at Beatrice. "So no, I don't have a degree from Yale. I don't have a diploma to hang on my wall. The last year of my education was spent in a hospice, watching the strongest woman I've ever known fade away. I learned about sacrifice, about dignity, and about what a story is really for, to give a voice to people who are in too much pain to speak for themselves." A profound, uncomfortable silence descended on the room. No one knew what to say. I had taken Beatrice's weapon and turned it into a shield. Then, from the end of the table, an older board member I'd never met, a Mr. Henderson, quietly pushed his copy of the dossier to the center of the table. "That's enough," he said, his voice raspy with emotion. He looked at Beatrice with profound disappointment. That boardroom meeting didn't end with an apology or a celebration. It just ended. In a thick, profound, and deeply uncomfortable silence, Mr. Henderson's words had shamed them, and my story had silenced them, but the wager was still on the table. Alistair, his face like a stone mask, simply concluded the meeting by saying, "We will see the terms of the agreement through. The issue will proceed as planned." And that was it. I walked out of that room not knowing if I was a hero or just a dead woman walking. The next few weeks were a weird sort of purgatory. The office was a minefield of quiet hostility. Beatrice and her team were forced to work with me to get the issue to print, and they did, but with a cold, resentful compliance. Every interaction was clipped, every email was frosty. They were all just waiting for the magazine to hit the stands and fail spectacularly. Waiting for the final satisfying proof that they had been right all along, that I was just a fluke, a bleeding heart story that had no place in the real world of business. I kept my head down, I focused on the work. I read every line, checked every proof, and poured every last ounce of myself into that issue. I owed it to Sam Hemlock, and to every other writer in there who had a story that deserved to be heard. Day the magazine was released, I honestly felt sick to my stomach. I didn't feel excitement, just a quiet, heavy dread. I stayed home from the office, telling myself I was taking a personal day, but really, I was just hiding. I couldn't bear to be in that building, to see the knowing smirks if the sales numbers were bad. I just sat in my tiny apartment, nursing a cup of coffee, and waiting for the axe to fall. The verdict didn't come in an email or a phone call. It came, as things do these days, like a whisper that grew into a roar online. Around noon, a friend texted me a link to Twitter. Someone had posted a picture of the cover, the striking, soulful face of that old woman from the Rust Belt. Caption read, "Haven't seen a cover this powerful in years. What's gotten into the quill?" Then another, and another. People were talking about Sam Hemlock's story, quoting lines from it. They were talking about its unflinching honesty, its raw beauty. The hashtag the quill is back started trending in Boston. Then in New York, it was a flicker of light in the darkness. Then, around 4 p.m., the first major review dropped. It was from a notoriously tough, old-school critic at the New York Times. A man who was famous for tearing apart even the most celebrated authors. I read it with my heart in my throat. The review wasn't just positive, it was a love letter. He called the issue a shocking, vital, and desperately needed return to form. He wrote, and I'll never forget these words, "For years the quill has felt like a beautiful, polished museum piece. This issue, it has a pulse. Sterling & Sons has finally stopped trying to embalm its legacy, and has instead given it a heart." He specifically praised Sam Hemlock's story as the debut of a major American voice. I started to cry, not loud. Sobs, but quiet, shaky tears of pure, unadulterated relief. The final blow, the one that no one could argue with, came the next morning. Alistair called an emergency meeting with the same executive committee. I walked into that same boardroom, but this time, the air was different. It was charged with a nervous, electric energy. Beatrice was there, looking pale and tense. Alistair didn't speak. He just nodded to a young, nervous-looking analyst from the sales department named Kevin. Kevin cleared his throat and put a chart up on the main screen. Good morning," he stammered. "As you know, we were tracking the launch numbers for the new issue of the quill." He clicked to the next slide. It was a graph showing the sales projections versus the actual results. The actuals line didn't just beat the projections, it shot straight up like a rocket. The initial print run of 50,000 copies sold out in the first 24 hours, Kevin said, his voice growing more confident with every word. "Online subscriptions have increased by 400%. We've had calls from every major bookstore chain in the country demanding more copies. We've already ordered a second print run of another 100,000. He paused, then delivered the final stunning verdict. "These are the highest single-issue sales numbers the quill has seen in 15 years. A dead silence fell over the room. It was the same silence as before, but this time it wasn't filled with their judgment of me. It was filled with the deafening, undeniable sound of my success. I watched as the board members just stared at the screen, their faces a mixture of awe and complete disbelief. I risked a glance at Beatrice. She looked like she had been turned to stone. All the color had drained from her face. She was staring at the numbers on the screen as if they were a foreign language she couldn't comprehend. Her weapon, my past, was meaningless. The numbers had spoken. The numbers had won. Alistair looked at the screen, then he looked down the long, polished table at me. And for the first time, a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. It was a smile of relief, of shock, and of something that looked an awful lot like pride. In that moment, I wasn't the cleaner, the consultant, or the dropout. I was the one who had saved his father's legacy. The moment after Kevin, the sales analyst, finished speaking, the silence in that boardroom was even more profound than before. But this was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the silence of judgment, it was the silence of awe. Every prejudice, every skeptical glance, every quiet sneer, it all just evaporated against the cold, hard, undeniable truth of that sales chart, that the meeting ended without another word. As Alistair and I walked out, the hallway felt like a different world. People who used to walk past me as if I were invisible now stopped, pressing themselves against the wall to let us pass. Some mumbled congratulations, others just stared. Their eyes a mixture of admiration and a little bit of fear. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. Kevin from sales caught my eye from down the hall and gave me a small, triumphant nod. It was a tiny gesture, but in that moment, it meant the world. The reckoning was swift. Alistair called Beatrice into his office right after. The door shut, and I didn't need to hear what was said inside. 10 minutes later, the door opened. Beatrice walked out, her face pale and tight with fury. The smugness, the condescension, it was all gone. She just looked defeated. She walked past my little supply closet office without a word, her eyes filled with a cold, hard hatred. "You think you found a diamond in the rough," she hissed as she passed my desk later, her voice low and venomous. "He just let a weed into the garden." An hour after that, I saw her being escorted out of the building by security, carrying a cardboard box with her personal belongings. Her war was over, but Alistair wasn't done. The next morning, he called a company-wide town hall meeting. Everyone, from the senior editors down to the mailroom clerks, gathered in the main atrium. No one knew what it was about. Alistair stood in front of them all, and for the first time, he didn't look like a powerful CEO. He just looked like a man who had something important to say. He asked me to stand beside him. My heart was hammering as I walked up to join him. "I've called you all here today," he began, his voice echoing in the quiet space, "because I made a mistake, a serious one." He paused, looking out at the crowd of faces. "I let my own arrogance and prejudice cloud my judgment. I have fostered a culture here that judges people by their resumes, by the schools they went to, by the connections they have, instead of by the quality of their character and the talent they possess." He then turned to me, and he spoke directly to me, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Clara, I was wrong. I misjudged you. I treated you with disrespect. And for that, I am profoundly sorry." A stunned murmur rippled through the room. A Finch, a Sterling, apologizing, publicly, in front of his entire company. "The wager we made on the last issue," he continued, "taught me a lesson. Talent doesn't have a zip code. Intelligence doesn't require an Ivy League degree. And the integrity and courage this young woman showed, that's the kind of character that money can't buy, and it's something this company needs more of." He took a deep breath. "According to our original agreement, I promised Clara a full-time editorial position, but her success has exceeded the terms of that wager beyond anyone's imagination." He looked me straight in the eye, his voice firm. "Therefore, effective immediately, I am promoting Clara May Thompson to the position of editor-in-chief of the Quill." The room exploded. Not with whispers, but with applause. It started hesitantly, then grew into a wave of genuine, heartfelt support. I just stood there, stunned, trying to breathe. Editor-in-chief. The title sounded foreign, like it belonged to someone else's life. Alistair waited for the applause to die down. He offered me his hand. "You earned it, Clara," he said, his voice low enough for only me to hear. I took his hand. It was firm, steady, and for the first time warm. This wasn't the cold, transactional handshake of our wager. This was a handshake of respect, a new beginning. Justice, it turns out, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet apology and the title you deserve. And in that moment, it felt incredibly sweet. It's funny how a year can feel like a lifetime, and the blink of an eye all at once. The Sterling and Sons building doesn't feel like a cold, silent cathedral anymore. The atmosphere has changed. The old, stern portraits of the Sterling men are still on the walls, a nod to the history that built the place, but now they share space with vibrant, framed covers of the Quill, showcasing new authors from every corner of the country. You can hear laughter in the hallways now. It's no longer a place of suffocating tradition. It's a place where stories come to life. My office isn't the supply closet anymore. It's Alistair's old one, with the huge glass window overlooking the Boston skyline, but I've made it my own. The imposing leather chairs are gone, replaced with comfortable sofas. One wall is a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf, filled with everything from classics to brand-new submissions. And on the wall opposite my desk, there's a simple frame. Inside, preserved behind glass, are my original yellow sticky notes. The one about letting the dust settle. The one about the face of the woman from the Rust Belt. They're a daily reminder. Not of where I came from, but of why I started. That afternoon, I had a meeting. A young woman named Maria walked into my office, looking even more terrified than I was on my first day. She was from a community college in El Paso, Texas, and she clutched her manuscript to her chest like it was a shield. She'd submitted her work through a new initiative I'd started, the Sterling and Sons Emerging Voices program, designed specifically to find talent in places no one else was looking. "Thank you for seeing me, Miss Thompson," she whispered. "Please call me Clara," I said, smiling as I got up from behind my desk. "And thank you for sharing your story with me. Coffee?" I poured a cup for her myself, and instead of returning to my big CEO chair, I sat on the sofa across from her. I wanted her to know this was a conversation, not an interrogation. "Your story," I began, tapping her manuscript, "about your grandmother's garden on the border. It's extraordinary, Maria. It's honest." Her eyes lit up. "Really?" "My professor said it was too specific, that it wouldn't have brought appeal." I felt that old, familiar sting of anger, but I kept my voice gentle. "Let me give you some advice. Don't ever let anyone tell you your story is too specific. The truth is always in the details. Your voice matters. Where you come from matters. Don't you ever let them convince you to sand down the edges of your story just to make it more comfortable for people who weren't willing to listen in the first place." We talked for an hour, not just about her manuscript, but about her family, her dreams, her fears. I gave her the encouragement I had desperately needed at her age. As we were wrapping up, Alistair walked past my open office door. He paused, seeing me and Maria sitting together on the sofa, pages spread out between us. He didn't interrupt. He just caught my eye and gave me a quiet, genuine nod of approval. Later he stopped by. "I trust your judgment, Clara," he said. "You're the one with the instinct." He used that word, instinct, the one his father had believed in, and I knew he finally understood what it meant. That night, after everyone had gone home, I stood by my office window alone, looking down at the city lights. I no longer saw a cold, intimidating landscape of power. I saw millions of homes, millions of lives, and millions of stories waiting to be told. I looked back at the Clara's story is a powerful reminder of a simple, often forgotten truth. Your value is not determined by the room you're in, but by what you bring to it. So many of us have felt like Clara at some point, invisible, underestimated, or judged by a label someone else gave us, whether it's our age, our background, or the job we do. We are told, in ways both loud and quiet, that we don't belong. We are handed a broom when we know we can wield a pen. This story teaches us that the world's most suffocating walls are often built from the quiet prejudices and silent assumptions of others, but it also shows us that integrity is its own form of power. Clara didn't fight Beatrice's fire with fire. She fought it with truth, character, and an undeniable talent that simply could not be ignored. It proves that, as a wise Vietnamese saying goes, true gold does not fear fire. Vang that kang sid lia. When you are tested, your authentic self is what shines through. Her journey is a testament to the fact that our real education comes not from the diplomas on our walls, but from the life we've lived, the burdens we've carried, and the quiet wisdom we've earned along the way. That is a pedigree no one can take from you. This story isn't about revenge. It's about reclamation, reclaiming the narrative of who you are. This story touched us deeply, and we believe the best stories are the ones that start a conversation. What part of Clara's journey resonated with you the most? Or perhaps you have a story of your own about a time your true worth shone through against the odds. Let us know in the comments below. Your likes are a tremendous encouragement for our team, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. Until next time, may you find peace in your own story and the strength to let your own truth shine. Be well.